You want to make sure that any new members that's coming in, that they sign the operating agreement. And that's why it's important to draft one as well. New members coming in, you shouldn't have to sit down with any new member and have to constantly repeat what the expectations are of how you're operating. If you have an agreement, you can just give them an operating agreement and they have to sign the operating agreement. In certain states, it says, if you have an operating agreement and a member don't sign, they may not be bound by whatever your expectations are. And so you want to make sure that you have operating agreement and they sign that operating agreement and everyone is in agreement. They understand and they're binding themselves to this expectation. So there is no confusion amongst anyone who considers themselves an economic rights holder or an owner. And so I guess I will stop there because I knew I'm trying to pick out from my notes some really important things to cover without going, too long on this. But what I want you to walk away from, part 4 of dealing with proper formation of LLC is that you want to think about when you are established, or even if it's after established, if it's you and someone else, how do you want your company to be operating, or how is it operating? Once you think about that, make sure that your decisions and roles, your decisions and agreements that are in writing reflects that. There's no confusion in that. Also, I want you to walk away with knowing that it is important to understand how your state looks at an LLC and how they look at an issue. I'm gonna give you an example of the language that's actually used in Georgia's state statute, because there is, as you've seen, there's a body of provisions and articles that pretty much cover every nook and cranny of how you're operating as an LLC. And you don't want the default law to say, this is that situation. Let's take that, let's parse that from here and we'll apply it to here, and it doesn't fit you. Because what the law says, and I'm reading this from Georgia, this language is repeated over and over again in Georgia's state statute. It starts off with, unless the articles of organization or written operating agreement, and that's how it starts, and then it goes on to the language. Unless the articles of organization or a written operating agreement, and so they're saying unless this is the case, then everything else that we say will be the case will. And in this particular instance, I don't need to, this is just talking about management. I don't want to read the whole statute, but this says, unless the articles of organization or written operating agreement vests management of limited liability company in a manager or managers, management of the business and affairs of the limited liability company will be vested in members. So I touched on that earlier. So this right here, I'm reading from the Georgia law, and it says, unless the articles of organization or written operating agreement vests management of the limited liability company in a manager or managers, management of the business and affairs of the limited liability company shall be vested in the members. So you see here, if you don't have an operating agreement stating how management will actually happen, if you don't have that, then by law, at least in Georgia, and there's a lot of other states that mirrors this, by law, it will vest in all members. And so that's why that's important. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap up there, and we're going to move on to part 5, where we will wrap up the proper formation of an LLC.